welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us to discuss matters Africa. On the show this week, we host James Mworia. He's the CEO of Centum, a leading investment company in East Africa. He has an incredible story to share. We also get your views on the issues, and we have Africa's top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. James Mworia has an incredible story of success, being one of the youngest people to be made CEO of one of East Africa's top firms. He literally came from the filing rooms to the boardroom, and he shares his story with us. Let's take a look at his profile.
James Mworia has been the Chief Executive Officer of Centum Investment Company Limited and its subsidiaries since October 2008. He has over 10 years work experience, including investment management at TransCentury and Centum. James is a CFA charter holder, certified public accountant, holds a Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Nairobi, and is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. He's a member of the Law Society of Kenya, LSK, and a member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accounting, CIMA. He's a chairman of UAP Financial Services Limited and represents Centum as a non-executive director on numerous boards.
Let's get straight to his insights on business, success, and Africa. Thank you, James. It's a great pleasure to have you with us on the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Thanks, Julie. It's always a pleasure.
You know, you've achieved incredible growth with Centum. Just tell us, looking at the whole experience thus far, what are the greatest potential areas of growth for businesses on the continent? And what are the greatest challenges you've had to deal with so far?
No, that's an interesting question. I think I see potential in really all areas. But if one was to focus, I would really focus on satisfying basic needs of people. It's our basic needs as a continent, in my view, and basic areas like health, education, provision of power, provision of as basic a need as food, agriculture, real estate. There's an increasing rate of urbanization, and people need not just places to live in, residential areas, but also places to do business in. And there's a huge need in that particular area. There's need in ICT. There's need in media, which you're in, entertainment, with the youth bulge. So there's a lot of scope, and really the scope is in the basics, in my view. The challenges we have faced thus far in implementation, I think, are several. One is just the business environment and the pace of executing, particularly where there's interface with government and you're trying to get approvals and regulations. I think it's still too slow, and there's need to speed up the pace of doing things, because when it starts slow, we are postponing the creation of employment opportunities for many people. We are working on several projects, and for some of them we've had to get in excess of 20 approvals. And taken a several years.
From different government offices?
From different government offices, and you're chasing various, and just lack of clarity on what is expected. If you begin this process, do you have a reasonable expectation that you'll get an approval at the end of the process? And that makes it expensive, and it creates room for rent seeking. And to an extent, it also discourages investment, particularly in the early stages of the development of projects. I think there's a lot of room there. The second challenge is more of a perception gap, and that's what I think a forum like the World Economic Forum is bridging. There's a perception gap around the risks of doing business in Africa, and that delays or makes it more difficult when you're trying to raise sizable sums of capital to come and invest in our continent. The perception investors have out there is that the risk is a lot higher than it actually is in reality. And that's why I commend World Economic Forum, because here you have players from all over the world who have an interest in doing business in Africa, who can come and have a first-hand experience and meet the players on the continent. And hopefully those perceptions will get, will get bridged. The other area is just the cost of doing business on areas that government should be addressing. I have in mind security. If you look at some of our projects, the cost of security is inordinately high, or the cost of providing security. And these are some of or the cost of transportation is also inordinately high, and it therefore increases the cost of doing business and increases inflation across the board. So those are some of the challenges, but I don't want to be pessimistic. We've seen a significant improvement over the last 10 years. A project like Two Rivers, which is one of our flagship projects, we've been able to successfully raise in excess of $200 million for that sort of project with very little publicity.
Where has this fundraising primarily
Some of this funding has come from Kenya, Kenyan institutions, and actually sizable funding. And 5 years ago, I remember it was very difficult to get long-term debt funding in Kenya. We've got funding in excess of 10 years, denominated in dollar at very competitive rates. I think it's a demonstration of the maturity of our financial markets in Kenya. We've secured some of the funding from Chinese investors, some of the funding from South African investors, and yet some from Brazilian investors. So there's a lot of, that's the equity funding. The debt funding piece, we've been able to raise it from Kenya, and that is in excess of $60 million.
It's an expression of confidence, certainly, in the economy and the potential. Let's come back to the fact that, you've mentioned the World Economic Forum is playing a strong strategic role in reigniting the confidence, in dealing with those misperceptions. Also, of course, while there's perceived risk, return on the continent is very, very high. But there's some feeling from local businesses across Africa that sometimes our governments focus too much on foreign investment and give preferential treatment to foreign businesses. Do you have a perspective on that?
I think my perspective is at several levels. The theme of this conference is around growth and the creation of inclusive growth and job creation. And when you look at the business environment on the continent, across the continent, I think it's a lot more difficult for the people at the bottom of the economic stratum to do business. And so you have different environments for different players in our continent. You have the people at the very bottom, which is where the majority of Africans are, where the majority of jobs are being created, and I think the excessive bureaucracy and the licensing procedures and the taxes on basic goods and services makes life very difficult for them. And I think through simple interventions, you could actually make it a lot easier for a young person who wants to get into business, into film, or whatever it is. Why should such a person pay taxes, for instance? Why should they pay a license, for instance? I think there's a lot more that can be done. I'm not sure there's a sufficient dialogue taking place around what we as people who are playing in the larger business segment can do to make life easier and to create a better environment so that we can democratize access to economic opportunities. Then you have the category where you have medium and large businesses. I think by and large there's been improvement in that particular segment of the business. I think still a lot more can be done because the multiplier impact of growth in that segment is going to be huge. And here I have in mind, and to the point you've made around the preferential treatment for foreign investors, I think governments across the board are some of the largest investors and they are the largest single spenders in the economy. And if there's a focused policy around using foreign investment as a catalyst for the development of a middle class and of national champions, I think that would have a huge impact. I have in mind some of the large infrastructure projects that are taking place across the continent. Recently, I was a member of the Kenyan state visit to Qatar, and we visited the large port project. And the presentation that they made to us is that in this port project, whoever is awarded, all the subcontracting work has to be done by local Qatari companies. And that's how they are creating national champions.
Developing supplier chains that are local and growing local businesses.
And these national champions then in turn support smaller businesses to then plug in welders, carpenters, transporters, and the rest, and then you have a trickle-down effect. I think that is not happening, and if it's happening, it's not at a sufficient level. And that's where one gets the feeling that this preferential treatment for external players coming into the continent to the exclusion of the entities that are actually creating jobs and creating opportunities for everybody else, on the continent.
Thank you for that example of how things can be done to ensure that you're raising, the medium and small businesses as well, and therefore, the majority. Let's go to the issue of corporate governance, and particularly the fact that we've never been seen or believed to benchmark to international standards, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's governance within, management at management level, whether it's. Do you think that is a misconception? Where do you think we are in terms of standards, whether it's auditing, whether it's, just basically in terms of excellence?
Yeah. I think that's one of the areas where we face a perception gap. And you made the point that the returns in Africa are high. The returns in Africa are high because there's a misperception on risk. Risk is mispriced. And the evidence for that is there've been a sizable number of African companies that have been able to tap capital markets and raise sizable sums of capital. An example of that is 3 years ago at Centum, we were able to raise, we issued our first bond, we raised $50 million. We've just raised $200 million. And that story is repeated across the board in a number of other companies. If I look at a market like the Nairobi Securities Exchange, more than half of trading activity that is taking place on the Nairobi Securities Exchange is from foreign investors outside Kenya. I think that's a very similar case in Nigeria, in Ghana, and in a lot of the other capital markets. This improvement, I think I would trace it to about 10 years ago. In Kenya, for instance, we moved from Kenya accounting standards, we adopted international accounting standards. We moved from, when I was a student, we learned Kenya auditing standards. We've now moved to international auditing standards. I think many of our large and medium-sized companies are operating on a similar scale as international companies. But there's perception. Speaking as an executive who is running a listed company, I don't think we're spending enough time engaging with international investors and helping bridge the perception gap that our processes, the quality of the human resource, the quality of the execution that is happening in these companies, and the quality of the corporate governance practices are really on par with other international companies. And therefore, we trade at a discount. And what that means is that our cost of capital is consequently higher. So I think we are 60-70% there. What is left is more of bridging the perception. And that perception probably will only be bridged when we have more success stories of people who have invested, institutions who have invested, and who've had a positive experience with the companies that they have interacted with.
Is the narrative changing? Do you think, are we bridging that gap?
I think by and large we are. If you look at the World Economic Forum that we are currently participating in, and you see the number of companies that are participating in the forum, they are sizable. If you look at the foreign portfolio flows that are coming into the continent to invest in different companies, again, it's sizable. On a weekly basis, I receive delegations of international investors who've come into our market to understand where the opportunities are. In fact, I would dare say that we probably have more capital-seeking opportunities in Africa today than there are bankable opportunities to be leveraged. Yeah, to that are investment ready.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
In one of the opening sessions here at the World Economic Forum, one of the panelists said that Africans should invest in African businesses to increase the confidence of foreign investors. And that bothered me slightly because I thought Africans should invest in African businesses, period, not to draw any other capital in. What are your thoughts on that?
And I think it's a perception issue. Africans have been investing in Africa for a long time.
Kenya trading with Tanzania and Uganda.
If I take Centum was set up in 1967 as a listed company. purely with Kenyan investors. So we've been at this game for a very, very long time. I think it's just a perception, and a perception that there is no capital on the continent and that the capital on the continent is not investing in Africa. If I take a practical case of the bond we raised, the $50 million we raised it in 2 weeks, and we raised all that money from Nairobi, from investors in Nairobi. We did not need to speak to any foreign investor to raise that sum of money. We are also in the asset management industry. 99% of the portfolios that we manage, and these are portfolios in excess of $1 billion, are invested in Africa. It's a perception issue. I don't think some of the large players who are local players, local investment players, even in Kenya, I don't think many of them are even represented in these sort of forums, or rather they're not attending these sort of forums. So they're not able to tell their story, and therefore there's a perception that African capital is not participating and playing in the African space. I think those are some of the perceptions that we have an obligation to bridge. I don't think it's anyone else's responsibility but our responsibility, and also to tell our story. If I look at Centum over the last 5 years, we've had a 30% annual return, compound return. Assets have grown 4 or 5 times. I'll be the first one to say that we've probably not done as good a job in telling the story of what we've done and the opportunities that are in Africa and the returns that we've reaped doing so.
Right. You took the mantle at Centum at a very young age, James, and you've accomplished incredible success in your career. A lot of young people might be looking at you now wondering, you know, did he have a silver spoon in his mouth? How did he get where he is today? How can I break what seem to be so many ceilings and barriers to success that exist around me? What advice do you have for young people, whether entrepreneurs or whether they're going into careers in the corporate sector? What would you say to them in terms of the journey to success?
I would say several things. One, I became CEO of Centum in 2008. I was 30 years. I joined the organization.
Very, very unique on our continent.
I joined the organization in 2001 as an intern. I started my job in the filing room. So.
And how many years later were you then?
I was CEO in 7 years, from the filing room to CEO in 7 years. When I joined the organization, I did not know anybody in the organization. And the thing I enjoyed about being in the filing room is that I said, this is an opportunity for me to learn the business and to learn the company by reading the files. And that's how I got to understand the business. I think my advice to young people is you're not entitled to anything, and take any opportunity you get and see what is the positive thing in this opportunity. It might be at the very bottom, and that's really where one needs to start. It's to learn. The second thing is to have confidence. I see this with a lot of the young people we recruit in Kenya, in Uganda, in Tanzania. They're very talented, they're very good. But many of them don't have the confidence and the belief that they are very good. And therefore, they do not want to venture outside their comfort zone. Many of them are not comfortable taking risks. And you know, I don't know, there's our education system. Many people are afraid to fail. And I think the fear of failure holds many of us back. The feeling that perhaps I'm not good enough, perhaps I'm not ready, perhaps I'm not deserving of this opportunity. And therefore we do not proactively venture out to try and grab these opportunities. Rather we sit back and wait and hope that somebody will recognize us in the corner and give us that opportunity. Right. I would just like to encourage young people in whatever they do to really venture out and believe that they are as good as anybody else. And in many instances, they are, and we have many success stories to demonstrate that. Today, the average age at Centum is 26 years. Believe it or not, I'm one.
These are your executives?
These are my executives. I'm one of the oldest people. I'm perhaps the second oldest executive in the organization. And these are young people who are taking on a lot of responsibility, and they're doing very well while at it. And I think they are role models for other young people in whatever they're doing. I think there's a focus on success, the path to success being employment. I don't think that's the case. The path to success is identifying what you're passionate at and what you love doing and what you would pay to do, and seeking it out and doing it very well and striving to be in the top 5-10% quartile in whatever you're doing, and whatever it is, I think and I believe you will be successful if you really try to play at the highest level, and you try to and you really endeavor to enhance your skills and your capabilities in whatever it is you choose to do.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Powerful. Thank you. In Africa, you know, the interplay between the young and the old is a very important theme in many of our cultures.
Yes.
So do you have, what is the nature of your board?
Yes.
And how do these young executives and this young CEO relate to the board?
Interestingly, you know, we have a very good relationship. And our board has been very, very supportive of young people and bringing on board young people. And they have given us a lot of latitude. I doubt there's a CEO of a listed company who has as much latitude as I have.
So you've inspired a lot of confidence in them.
And I can say that publicly. And I doubt there are managers of listed companies who have as much latitude as my managers do. And when you visit Centum, we have put up our golden rules, and one of the rules is make a decision, and a wrong decision is better than no decision.
Wow.
And this is something that publicly acknowledged. The ability to give people the freedom to fail, but to try again.
Right.
Because out of failure comes success, comes learning of how to do things differently. And that's what we're developing. And I would say the outlook of my board and the way they relate with young people, I think for me has been amazing and phenomenal. And what we're trying to do is to see how we can create more opportunities for more young people. And one of the programs we're working with is, as part of our corporate social investment, is coming up with a program to promote entrepreneurship. Because it's not possible for us to employ all the talented people. 2 years ago, we came up with a graduate recruitment program. And the first year we had 3,500 applicants. This year we had in excess of 5,000 applicants.
Wow.
Seeking 10 positions. And the question is, given that we don't have the capacity to employ all these 5,000 applicants, what can we do that can create opportunities for 200 or 300 of them, or as many of them as we can, in whatever it is that they choose to do? And this is one of the programs you're working on, because I don't think it's just important for you to say you've created shareholder wealth or you've created these profits. I think for me, my satisfaction will come when I help have an impact on as many people as I can beyond the immediate circle of Centum, our shareholders and our staff. It's, I think, an organization like Centum and the position that I'm in, I should be able to impact many, many lives. And those individuals should in turn be able to impact and reach out to many people. And I think that's probably the only way we can achieve inclusive growth and create employment opportunities for as many people.
That's the word, inclusivity.
Yeah.
That's it. And as we close, you highlighted the example of young people being scared of failure.
Yeah.
I think we also have a group of young people that are scared of success.
Yes.
Because sometimes, no, in fact, often success demands more of you.
Yes.
And so we have these two groups who are sitting there not sure of whether to stand up or not.
Yes.
And of course, we have an African leadership that is struggling to raise the continent. And what advice would you have for the citizens of the continent, particularly these young people, and also the African leadership? Please look into the camera and give your message.
I think my advice is that we as a continent and myself as a citizen of this continent, we sometimes expect too little of ourselves and too little of others. I think it's time that we raise the expectation gap. We are deserving of the best. We are capable of rising to the occasion and producing the best in us. And I think it's our obligation as citizens to really bring out the best in us and to strive to bring it out. And it's also our obligation to also expect and demand quality services from those from the public sector, and really hold the public sector accountable. But I also think that there's a need for us to shift our mentality a bit from a culture of entitlement to more of a culture of what can I offer? How can I add value? How can I be part of the solution? How can I bring my skills and talents to bear to create a better continent, to create a better country, to be part of a better organization, and really to make a difference in our families and eventually in our own individual lives.
Thank you so much, James.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Thank you, Julie. Excellent. Thank you.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
I am James Mworia. I'm the Group Chief Executive Officer of Centum. More importantly, I'm a son of Africa, and I am playing my role in creating a better continent and expanding the set of opportunities available to as many people as I can. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogue.
Incredible success, but plenty of grace and humility as well. That's James Mworia. We were part of the same class of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Leadership Program. We wish him all the best in all that he does in the future. We love your views, though, on the issues. Let's have a look.
This week, we asked you, how can Africa encourage entrepreneurship in order to promote economic growth and job creation? Daniel Osiemo says, by educating the youth and giving them an enabling environment to do business. Omunyokol Moses says, reintroduce cooperative societies, especially in rural areas. This will mobilize bigger resources and bigger markets. It will be the training ground for entrepreneurs.
My name is Edward Waruki from Nairobi, Kenya. To aim on the issue, to encourage entrepreneurship that can spur economic growth in Africa. One, government. Government has a key role, especially as part of its mandate, which is to provide an enabling environment where it has to come up with policies and initiatives that can favor aspiring, budding, and existing entrepreneurs. Number two are financiers, who I believe have a key role, especially in financial advice and support to anyone who wants to venture in entrepreneurship. Number three, the civil society. It will come in handy, especially in skills empowerment, because these are among the many gaps that the civil society comes in to help people. And number four, private companies, which I feel are doing good, and they should be encouraged to form more PPPs.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Thank you for keeping your thoughts always coming in. We keep the dialogue going on social media, and I love to see all the comments, the discussions that come up. Thank you for that. Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature investment trends shaping Africa in 2014. This is according to Frontier Market Network. Starting us off at number 10 is the growth of infrastructure bonds as an asset class. About 40% of Africans currently live in urban areas, and it is estimated that by 2050, more than 60% of the population will be urbanized. Africa's large infrastructure deficit, therefore, is a top priority for governments across the continent. Big infrastructure projects are in the pipeline, while others have already been developed to enable faster extraction of natural resources and to foster economic growth. At number 9 is the ICT boom. Africa's telecommunications industry has been one of the fastest growing sectors. There is a growing wave of innovation as entrepreneurs and large corporations alike launch new web-based ventures coupled with sustainable investment in infrastructure and the uptake of low-cost devices that have enabled millions to connect for the first time. Taking the number 8 spot is the growing consumer base, which is expanding retail and property sectors. The rapidly growing young middle class is pushing up demand for consumer goods. Demand in fast-moving consumer goods sector, FMCG, and key industries such as cement will continue to experience a boom in tandem with the increasing size of the middle class. Local and international retailers and food and beverage companies will continue to implement their expansion strategies next year. Positioned at number 7 is the bullish prospects for hospitality and tourism sectors. The number of business people traveling around the continent will increase with increased interconnectivity and also with the promotion of intra-regional trade. The hotel chains from the international community are focusing very much on Africa at the moment and need expansion on the continent. A deepening banking sector is at number 6. Regulatory reforms, the expanding middle class and technological advancements have helped to grow the banking sector in Africa. Success in 2014 largely depend on the capabilities and business models of individual institutions with improved economic growth and business environments in African markets also being contributors. Slotted in at number 5 is the demand shift in agriculture as investment rises. Africa has the potential to increase agricultural production by 300%. Growth in production will therefore outstrip the growth in demand. This will keep commodity prices in check and limit production margins. Taking the number 4 spot is renewable projects which are on the rise. Certain countries will continue to progress and dominate attention, mostly in East and West Africa due to demand size. With energy security being the key driver, there will remain a large number of independent power producers procured on an unsolicited basis, but many countries are now moving towards a more regulated procurement regime. Coming in at number 3 is the continued strategic importance of oil and gas sectors. The oil sector has been one of the strong upward movement in acreage opening, drilling exploration success, oil and gas discoveries, net reserve additions, corporate and capital inflows with rising oil and gas production and growing net exports. Already, East African countries such as Kenya and Tanzania have successfully drilled oil explorations. At number 2 is Africa topping Asian investors' wish lists. With the continued expected rise in China's demand for urbanization, Africa with its abundance in natural resources will be at the top of most Asian investor wish lists. Demand for acquisition opportunities in iron ore, copper, cobalt, hard coking coal and manganese is primarily determined by China's urbanization and steel industry. And at number 1 this week is the rising private equity. Market for private equity and venture capital investment in Africa is growing. More African entrepreneurs are taking steps to attract funding in 2014, for instance, focusing on developing a sound business plan, seeking out best practices in business governance, for example, audited financials, and networking with potential investors. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
It's already time to end the show, and we finish with a proverb from the kingdom of the Ashanti. Act as if it is impossible to fail. Be bold, be ambitious, seek success, do something. Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.